I set the table with the gold-rimmed Haviland porcelain, the set Margaret and I had received as a wedding gift 42 years ago. It was delicate, old-money bone china that required a steady hand to wash. After all this time, only 2 saucers had tiny chips in the glaze, scars of a life well lived. The late afternoon light filtered through the heavy linen drapes, the same ones we'd chosen in the autumn of Mutngin Chintram Tamuchin, casting a warm, amber glow over the mahogany table. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing Brianna's favorite, a slow-braised rosemary pot roast with root vegetables, the recipe her mother had spent 20 years perfecting before the shadows of illness finally took her from us. I had even hand-printed the name cards. In the world I used to inhabit, the details weren't just important, they were everything. They arrived 25 minutes late. Silas pushed through the front door first, his boots thudding against the hardwood I had polished just that morning. Brianna trailed behind him, her eyes glued to her phone, her thumb flicking rapidly across the screen. His parents, Harrison and Eleanor Vane, followed with an air of practiced condescension. Eleanor wore a silk blouse that cost more than my annual property taxes, and Harrison adjusted his navy blazer with the kind of stiff precision you only see in men who think their zip code defines their soul. They looked around my dining room not with nostalgia, but with the clinical detachment of insurance adjusters surveying a wreckage. "Elias," Silas said, his handshake brief and dry as parchment. "Thanks for the invite. Smells rustic." "Please, sit," I said, maintaining the calm I'd spent decades cultivating in boardrooms. "Dinner is served." I had positioned everyone with intent. Brianna to my right, Silas beside her, and the Vanes across from them. I took my place at the head of the table, the only place in this house where I still felt like the master of my own domain. I brought out the roast on Margaret's heavy silver serving platter. The steam rose, filling the room with the scent of red wine and herbs, but the atmosphere remained frigid. "How quaint," Eleanor said. Her eyes tracing the floral wallpaper that Brianna used to say looked like a garden in the rain. "I suppose there's a certain charm to preservation. It's like a time capsule from the mid-90s, isn't it, Harrison?" Harrison hummed in agreement, his eyes settling on the framed photo of Brianna's college graduation on the sideboard. "I hear the promotion went through, Brianna. High-level marketing director at the firm. Quite the leap." Brianna didn't look up from her device. It's about time they recognize the work I put in. It's all about who you know in this city." The words felt like a physical blow. She had no idea that I'd spent 3 weeks on the phone with Julian Thorne, the CEO of her firm, and a man who owed his entire career to a bridge loan I'd given him in Mutngin Chintram Chinwi born. I'd cashed in a 30-year favor to ensure her resume didn't just hit the desk, but was moved to the top of the pile. She thought it was her networking. I let the silence hang, a heavy curtain between us. Silas reached for the bottle of wine. I'd uncorked a Hangin Lair Mui Hai Napa Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion. It was a $60 bottle, a luxury on the modest pension they thought I lived on. He examined the label, his lip curling slightly. Finally, something drinkable in this zip code. He poured a generous glass for Eleanor, then Harrison, then Brianna. He filled his own glass to the brim, and then with a deliberate, slow movement, set the bottle down at the far end of the table, well out of my reach. My daughter watched him do it. She saw the empty space next to my plate. She said nothing. "Silas has such an evolved palate," Eleanor remarked, swishing the wine in her glass. "We made sure he grew up appreciating the finer things. It's a tragedy how many people settle for mediocrity." Harrison leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. "Elias, have you considered the resale value of this lot? The neighborhood is trending. We just finished the marble installation in our guest wing. If you updated the kitchen, you might actually get a decent price. You're sitting on equity that's just rotting." "The house suits me," I said, my voice steady. "It's full of memories." "Memories don't pay the bills, Dad," Brianna snapped, finally setting her phone down. "You're clinging to a ghost." The conversation shifted then, like a predator spotting a weakness. Silas leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a strange, frantic energy. "So, big news. We've finalized the summer plans. A week in the Exumus, Bahamas, the Azure Reef Resort. Private villas, butler service, the whole 9 yards. Me, Brianna, Mom, and Dad. We leave on the 15th. My fork paused halfway to my plate. The Exumus. Margaret and I had spent our 20th anniversary there. That sounds like a beautiful trip. The Azure Reef is a world-class property. "It is," Silas said, grinning at his parents. "We only had the budget for 5 tickets, though. First class. Just enough for us and the Vanes. The mathematics of the seating chart were tight. The room seemed to shrink. 5 tickets. 4 people at the table, other than me. The 5th ticket, I realized, was for Silas's personal assistant, or perhaps just an empty seat for his ego. The exclusion wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. It was a border wall built of airline miles and spite. I can certainly cover my own way, I said, keeping my tone light, though my heart was beginning to thud against my ribs. I'd love to see the islands again. It's been years. Brianna didn't look at me. She slid her phone across the table to Eleanor, showing her a digital brochure of the resort's infinity pool. Her voice was cold, clinical. Actually, Dad, we decided we really need a break from you. This is a family-only trip. The word family felt like a serrated blade. I had paid for her wedding, a $30,000 gala, that had drained the last of my visible savings. I had given them $15,000 for the down payment on the SUV parked in my driveway. I had covered the $8,000 credit card bet Silas had hidden from her 3 years ago. I was the silent foundation of their entire lifestyle, and yet, I wasn't family enough for a seat on a plane. I see, I said. My hand was reaching for the potato bowl. I watched it stop, suspended in the air. I slowly pulled it back and rested it in my lap. I understand. I stood up, the chair legs scraping harshly against the hardwood. I'll get the dessert. Nobody protested. Nobody even looked up. Silas was already refilling Eleanor's glass with the wine I'd paid for. As I walked into the kitchen, the sound of their laughter followed me light, easy, and entirely indifferent to my absence. I didn't go to the refrigerator. I walked past the counter, through the mood room, and into my small home office. I shut the door and sat in the dark for a long moment, listening to the muffled sounds of the people I had supported for a decade mocking the house I had provided for them. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last dinner I would ever cook for them. I opened my laptop. The screen's glow was the only light in the room. I entered a password that no one in this house knew. I wasn't just Elias Sterling, the retired manager. To the world of high finance and Caribbean real estate, I was the silent partner of Sterling Wayfarer Holdings. I had spent 20 years after Margaret's death quietly acquiring boutique properties, turning failing inns into gold mines, and staying entirely off the grid. My modest life was a choice away to ensure that if my daughter ever loved me, she loved the man, not the portfolio. I looked at my private dashboard. Born fi $1 million in liquid assets. Then, I typed in the search bar. Azure Reef Resort. Exumus. For sale. The listing popped up immediately. It was a distressed asset. The current ownership group was facing a massive tax lien and was looking for a quiet, fast exit. They wanted a buyer who could close in 10 days. An all-cash deal. I looked at the dates of Brianna's trip. August Moy Lempth to the Highway Hind. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 3 years. It was Cheen, Ba Moy PM on a Friday, but I knew Marcus Thorne, the premier commercial broker in the Bahamas, would answer. Marcus, I said when the line connected, it's Elias Sterling. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Elias, the ghost of hospitality himself? I thought you'd crawled into a hole and pulled the dirt in after you. I've been resting, Marcus, but I'm bored. I'm looking at the Azure Reef listing. What's the floor price? For you? They'll take high-fire Moy million cash if you can close by the 14th. But Elias, that place is a mess. The management is skimming, the staff is surly, and the infrastructure is failing. Why would you want that headache? Because, I said, watching my reflection in the dark window. I have some very important guests arriving on the 15th, and I want to make sure they get exactly the kind of service they deserve. You sound different, Elias. Everything okay? Everything is perfect, Marcus. Send the intent to purchase documents to my private server. I want to own the dirt, the docks, and the bed sheets by next Friday. I hung up. Through the office door, I heard Silas's voice rising in the dining room. Seriously, can you imagine him in the Exumas? He'd probably try to find a golden corral and complain about the price of the water. Their laughter erupted again. I didn't feel the sting this time. I felt something cold and precise, like the tumblers of a safe falling into place. They thought they were taking a vacation from me. They thought they were leaving the old man behind in his rotting equity. What they didn't know was that in 10 days, they wouldn't just be visiting a resort. They would be stepping onto my property. They would be sleeping in my beds, eating my food, and governed by my rules. I looked at the names on my screen. Silas Garrett, Brianna Sterling Garrett, Harrison Vane, Eleanor Vane. I hope you enjoy the flight. I whispered to the empty room. Because the landing is going to be very, very rough. I didn't bring out dessert. I walked back into the dining room, my face a mask of grandfatherly resignation. I'm feeling a bit tired, everyone. I think I'll turn in early. Please, help yourselves to the rest of the wine. About time, Silas muttered, not even looking up from his phone. We were starting to wonder if you'd fallen asleep in the flower. I smiled a small, thin thing. Good night, Silas. Enjoy the exhumus. I hear it's the kind of place where you truly find out what people are made of. I went upstairs and started packing a bag they would never see. I had a flight to catch on Monday morning and a resort to buy. What happened next would change their lives forever. But they wouldn't realize the trap was set until they were 3,000 miles away from home, standing on the white sands of a paradise that I now owned. The house felt cavernous the next morning. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the steam rise from my coffee, and watched Silas load their designer suitcases into the back of the SUV I had helped them finance. Brianna was there, too, checking her reflection in the window glass, adjusting a pair of oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than my first car. They didn't see me watching. To them, I was just part of the architecture and aging, slightly dusty fixture that would still be here when they returned, ready to be leaned on when the next unforeseen bill arrived. I hadn't always been the ghost of hospitality, as Marcus called me. 20 years ago, I was a high-stakes logistics coordinator for one of the largest shipping firms on the East Coast. I was the man who moved the world. But when Margaret got sick, the world stopped moving. The medical bills were a mountain, and the insurance company was a sieve. I did what any father and husband would do. I sold my shares, I liquidated my private holdings, and I vanished into a quiet life of hospital rooms and whispered prayers. Or so I let everyone believe. What Brianna never knew, what I'd never had the heart to tell her, was that the liquidation had been a strategic pivot. I didn't spend all the money on the hospital. I moved the remainder into high-risk, high-reward offshore REITs. While I was sitting in those plastic chairs in the oncology ward, I was quietly buying up stakes in struggling Caribbean boutique hotels. I worked from a laptop in the dark, rebuilding an empire while the love of my life slipped away. Margaret knew. On her last day, she took my hand and whispered, "Don't let our daughter become a woman who loves the gold more than the man who mined it, Elias. Keep her grounded." I had tried. I truly had. But then came Silas Garrett. Silas entered her life 4 years ago like a slick, high-gloss virus. He was the son of old money that was secretly running dry, though he carried himself with the arrogance of a billionaire. He saw Brianna, my beautiful, successful, empathetic Brianna, and he saw a soft target. He saw a father with a modest pension and a house in a prime zip code. Within 6 months, he'd proposed. Within a year, he'd begun the slow process of eroding her connection to me, replacing my values with the hollow elitism of his parents, Harrison and Eleanor. I remembered the wedding clearly. It was a born muilum, Hongdola affair at a country club where the grass was trimmed with nail scissors. Silas had insisted on the venue, then realized, 2 weeks before the date, that his family's trust fund was temporarily illiquid. Brianna had come to me, crying, saying they'd lose the deposit. I'd written the check. At the reception, Harrison Vane had pulled me aside, smelling of expensive scotch and unearned superiority. "A nice little party, Elias," he'd said, looking at my off-the-rack suit. "A bit flashy for your bracket, perhaps, but I suppose one must splurge for the only daughter." He hadn't thanked me. He'd treated my sacrifice like a social climbing fee I was lucky to pay, and it never stopped. The $15,000 bridge loan for their home down payment, the emergency roof repair that turned out to be a designer kitchen remodel, the TARM Hongdola credit card bill Silas had racked up on a networking trip to Vegas. Every time, Brianna would come to me with that specific look of practiced desperation, and every time, I would write the check, thinking of Margaret's words. I thought if I kept giving, I could keep her close. I didn't realize I was just funding my own obsolescence. The final straw had been 3 months ago. I'd overheard Silas talking to a real estate developer at a charity gala I'd surreptitiously attended. He didn't see me behind a decorative pillar. "The old man is sitting on nearly $2 million in equity," Silas had bragged, swirling his gin. "The house is a gold mine. Once we convince him he's getting forgetful, we'll move him into a luxury suite at Shady Pines and liquidate the asset. It's for his own good, really. He can't handle the stairs anymore." He'd laughed. A sharp, jagged sound that had severed the last of my patience. Standing in my kitchen now, watching them drive away, without even a wave, I realized That grounding, Brianna was no longer an option. She needed a shock to the system. She needed to see what the world looked like when the safety net she'd been cutting to pieces finally disappeared. I finished my coffee and went to the basement. Behind a false panel in my workshop sat my travel case. Inside were 3 different passports, all legal, all tied to my various corporate entities, and a secure satellite phone. I checked the balance on my primary operations account, Bafai Tam Mui Dola Million, with another Mui Hai Dola Million in managed assets. I called Marcus back as I drove toward the airport. The intent to purchase is signed and filed, Marcus said, his voice crackling with the humidity of the islands. The Azure Reef is officially yours, Elias. But I'm telling you, the place is a disaster. The current manager, a man named Jax Blackwood, is a piece of work. He's been running it like his own private fiefdom. The staff hasn't been paid in 3 weeks, and the books look like they were written by a toddler with a grudge. Even better, I said, merging onto the highway. I want the transition to be invisible. No press releases, no changes to the website. I want the staff to stay exactly as they are. Tell them their back pay will be doubled the moment I land, but only if they follow my instructions to the letter. What are you planning, Elias? This isn't your style. You're usually the guy who fixes things, not the guy who buys a sinking ship. I'm still fixing things, Marcus. I'm just starting with the people, not the property. Tell Jax Blackwood I'll be there by Bourne, Cone PM. I want a full staff meeting in the kitchens. Not the lobby. The kitchens. I landed in the Exumus under a sky so blue it looked painted. The air was thick with the scent of salt and diesel, the smell of my youth in the shipping yards. I took a battered taxi to the Azure Reef. From the road, it looked like a dream. Whitewashed villas clinging to a limestone cliff, infinity pools that seemed to spill into the turquoise ocean. But as I stepped into the lobby, I saw the truth. The paint was bubbling. The ceiling fans were wobbling. The receptionist was staring at her nails with a look of pure, unadulterated misery. I'm here to see Jax Blackwood, I said, setting my bag down. She didn't look up. He's in the bar. Who are you? The new owner. That got her attention. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. The owner? We weren't told? Exactly, I said. Where's the kitchen? The staff meeting was a sea of weary faces. 22 people, chefs, maids, groundskeepers, all looking like they were waiting for a death sentence. In the corner stood Jax Blackwood. He was a man in his late 30s with a permanent tan, a shirt unbuttoned too far, and eyes that moved too fast. He looked at me and smirked. So, you're the guy with the deep pockets, Jax said, leaning against a stainless steel prep table. I hope you brought a checkbook, because this place is a black hole. We've got a high-profile group coming in on the 15th, the Vane Garrett party. Big money. They're expecting 5-star service, and right now, I can barely give them 3. I looked at Jax, then at the staff. I know about the Vanes. That's why I'm here. I pulled a thick envelope from my bag and tossed it onto the table. Inside is Namui, $100 in cash. That covers your back pay and a Highway Fund Trum bonus for everyone in this room, except for Mr. Blackwood. The room went silent. Jax straightened up, his face reddening. Excuse me? I've been holding this place together with spit and grit. You've been skimming from the laundry contract and overcharging the liquor distributors, Jax. I said, my voice dropping to that cold, boardroom register that used to make CEOs sweat. I've had a private investigator on this property for 6 months. You're not fired. Not yet. You're going to stay on as the face of the resort. You're going to be the one who interacts with the Vane Garrett party. Jax squinted. Why? Because, I said, turning to the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Maria who looked like she'd seen it all. Starting on the 15th, the Azure Reef is going to undergo a very specific set of operational challenges. Maria, I want the air conditioning in the South Villa to be serviced on the day they arrive. It should work perfectly in the lobby, but in their rooms, it should be a sauna. The plumbing in the master suite, it should develop a mysterious rattle that sounds like a jackhammer at high, Hong AM. I looked at the head chef. The kitchen will suddenly have a supply chain issue. We'll be out of the vintage champagne they ordered. We'll be out of the Wagyu. In fact, the only thing we'll have plenty of is the local catch of the day, which will be served with a very, very high surcharge. The staff was starting to grin. They understood. They had been treated like garbage by people like the Vanes for years. Mr. Sterling, Maria said, her voice hesitant but intrigued. What about the guests? They'll complain. They'll want their money back. Let them complain, I said. I've already updated the terms and conditions on their booking. All sales are final during ownership transition periods. It's in the fine print they didn't read because Silas was too busy bragging about the discount he thought he was getting. I walked over to Jax Blackwood and leaned in close. You're going to be my puppet, Jax. You're going to tell them that these are unavoidable issues. You're going to be the one they scream at. And if you play your part perfectly, I won't turn over the evidence of your embezzlement to the local authorities. Do we have a deal? Jax looked at the cash on the table, then at the ice in my eyes. He nodded slowly. You're a terrifying man, Mr. Sterling. I'm a father, Jax. And I'm a man who's tired of being invisible. The next few days were a blur of activity. We didn't fix the resort. We calibrated its failure. We ensured the Wi-Fi would flicker every time someone tried to upload a photo to social media. We made sure the private beach would be undergoing emergency sand restoration during their stay. On the morning of the 15th, I stood on the balcony of the main office, watching the private ferry approach the dock. Through my binoculars, I could see them. Silas was standing at the bow, arms crossed, looking like he owned the horizon. Brianna was next to him, her white sundress fluttering in the breeze. Behind them, Harrison and Eleanor were already pointing at the resort, likely critiquing the architecture before they'd even stepped ashore. They looked happy. They looked triumphant. They looked like they were ready for the best vacation of their lives. I didn't know it yet, but Silas had a secret of his own, a reason he'd been so desperate to get Brianna away from me and into the isolation of the islands. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't just the owner of the resort. I was the one holding the keys to the truth that would destroy his entire world. As the boat bumped against the dock, I felt a vibration in my pocket. A text from Marcus. The investigators found it. Silas isn't just broke, Elias. He's been using your house as collateral for a private loan. He forged your signature 2 weeks ago. The air in my lungs turned to stone. He hadn't just mocked me. He'd stolen the one thing Margaret and I had built together. I looked down at the dock. Silas was stepping onto the pier, shouting at a porter to be careful with his bags. He looked up toward the main building, his eyes scanning the windows. I stepped back into the shadows, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, cold justice. Welcome to paradise, Silas, I whispered. I hope you like the heat. Because it's about to become unbearable. I sat in the security office, the room bathed in the flickering blue light of a dozen monitors. This was the nerve center of the Azure Reef, a small, windowless bunker tucked behind the laundry facilities. On the screens, I watched my life's greatest failures walk across the lobby. Silas Garrett was at the front desk, his face already flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. Beside him, Brianna looked exhausted, her hand resting on her hip in that specific way she did when she was trying to keep her temper from boiling over. Behind them, Harrison and Eleanor Vane were fanning themselves with their travel itineraries, looking at the ceiling fans as if they were prehistoric artifacts. I zoomed in on Silas. His eyes were darting around the lobby, not with the curiosity of a tourist, but with the frantic assessment of a man who was counting the silver. I didn't know it yet, but the forgery Marcus had mentioned was just the tip of the iceberg. Silas wasn't just broke, he was drowning, and he had been using my daughter and my home as his life jacket. I'm sorry, Mr. Garrett, Jax Blackwood said, his voice dripping with a fake, oily sincerity that I had coached him on for 3 hours. The presidential suite is currently undergoing an emergency asbestos abatement. We've had to move your party to the Garden Villas. The Garden Villas? Silas's voice cracked, echoing through the lobby. I booked the presidential. I have the confirmation right here. Do you have any idea who my father is? Do you know the kind of reviews I can leave for a dump like this? Jax didn't blink. He just leaned over the counter, his smile never wavering. Of course, sir. But as per the operational transition clause in your booking, the one you initialed on page 12, the resort reserves the right to reassign guest quarters in the event of safety hazards. Unless, of course, you'd like to sleep in a room filled with toxic particulates? Harrison Vane stepped forward, his voice a low, threatening rumble. Now see here, young man. We didn't fly first class to the Exumus to stay in Garden Villas. We want what we paid for, or we want a full refund and a flight to the Four Seasons. Refunds are processed in 60 to 90 business days, Mr. Vane, Jax replied coolly. And the Four Seasons is fully booked for the yacht regatta. Shall I have the porter take your bags to the garden? Or would you prefer to discuss this on the dock while you wait for a ferry that isn't coming until Tuesday? I watched Eleanor's face crumble. The Garden Villas were the oldest part of the property, charming, yes, but far from the ultra-luxe experience they'd been bragging about on social media for weeks. I'd personally seen to it that the garden part of the name was literal. The path to the villas was currently overgrown with sea grape vines, and the fountain in the center was a stagnant pond for local frogs. As they followed the porter out of the lobby, Brianna lagged behind. She looked smaller than she had in Orlando. She looked like a woman who was starting to realize that the glittering life she'd traded her father for was made of cheap tinsel. For a moment, she looked directly at the security camera, and my heart stuttered. What happened next changed everything. She didn't look angry. She looked terrified. I stayed in the bunker until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of bruised purple and gold. I had a file on my desk, the one Marcus had sent over. I opened it again, tracing the signature on the Lown document. It was a perfect copy of mine. Silas had spent time practicing this. He had sat in my house, perhaps even while I was making him dinner, and refined the art of stealing my legacy. He'd taken out a $300,000 private loan with a predatory firm called Blackwood Capital. The name hit me like a physical punch. Blackwood. I buzzed the front desk. Jax, get down here. Now. 5 minutes later, Jax slipped into the room, looking entirely too pleased with himself. Did you see his face, Elias? The guy looked like he was going to have a stroke when I told him about the garden villas. His mother actually asked if the frogs were organic. Jax, I said, sliding the Lown document across the desk. Why is the lender for Silas's private loan named Blackwood Capital? And don't lie to me. I own your soul for the next 10 days. Jax's smug expression vanished. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking at the floor. It's my brother, Silas. He runs a high-interest credit firm in Miami. He deals with guys like Garrett rich kids who've blown their trusts, but still need to maintain the image. I didn't know Silas was your son-in-law, Elias. I swear. I just knew he was a whale who was ripe for the harpooning. The world felt very small in that moment. The man I had hired to help me with my revenge was the brother of the man who was helping Silas steal my home. It was a circle of vultures, and I was sitting in the middle of it. Does your brother know Silas is here? I asked. Probably. Silas owes him 2 payments. He's been ducking his calls for weeks. That's probably why he was so desperate to get to the islands. He thinks Blackwood can't find him here. But you're here, I whispered. And so am I. I stood up and walked to the wall of monitors. On screen born, I could see the interior of the South Villa. It was Tamui degrees in there, and the humidity was thick enough to chew. Silas was pacing the floor, his shirt soaked through with sweat. Harrison was sitting on a wicker chair that looked like it was about to collapse, and Eleanor was clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. The plan changes? I said, my voice as cold as the deep Atlantic. We're not just going to make them uncomfortable, Jax. We're going to make them talk. I want to know exactly what Silas promised your brother. And I want to know why Brianna looks like she's waiting for a firing squad. That night, I moved. I didn't stay in the owner's suite. I moved into a maintenance shed that shared a thin wall with the South Villa's master bedroom. I wanted to hear them. I wanted to hear the rot in their voices when the lights went out. Around midnight, the mysterious rattle in the plumbing began. I'd had Maria's son, a clever kid with a wrench, rig a vibrator to the main intake pipe. It sounded like a freight train was idling under their floorboards. Shut it off, Silas. Brianna's voice pierced through the wall, sharp and ragged. I can't take it. The heat, the noise, the smell. This isn't what you promised. You said this would be a fresh start. It is a fresh start, Bree, Silas hissed. I could hear him pacing, his footsteps heavy on the old wood. We just have to get through this week. Once the deal with Vane's Associates goes through, we'll have enough to clear the debt and move to the coast. My dad just needs a little more time to move the funds. Your dad is broke, Silas, Brianna screamed. I saw the letters. I saw the foreclosure notice for their Palm Beach house. You've been lying to me for years. Keep your voice down, Silas snarled. I heard a thud, the sound of someone being pushed against a wall. You think your father is any better? The old man is sitting on a mountain of cash he's too stingy to share. He's probably at home right now eating a $10 steak while we're out here trying to save our lives. I did what I had to do, Brianna. For us. By forging his name? By stealing the house he shared with my mother? Her voice dropped to a whisper, thick with tears. If he finds out, he'll kill you. He won't find out, Silas said, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. The old man can barely find his reading glasses. By the time he realizes the house is gone, we'll be 10,000 miles away. Now shut up and go to sleep. We have to look perfect for the vans tomorrow. They're our only way out. I sat in the dark of the maintenance shed, my hands trembling not with fear, but with a cold, predatory rage. He wasn't just planning to steal the house. He was planning to vanish with my daughter, to take her into a life of grift and desperation, far away from the only person who truly loved her. I picked up the satellite phone and called Marcus. "Elias? It's midnight, what's going on?" "I need you to contact Blackwood Capital," I said. "Tell them I know where Silas Garrett is. And tell them if they want their $300,000, they need to send a representative to the Azure Reef on the 17th. But tell them one more thing, Marcus." "What's that?" "Tell them the owner of the resort is an old friend, and we're hosting a very special dinner." I hung up and looked at the wall. Silas was still talking, his voice a low drone of manipulation and lies. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought he had outrun his past. What happened next changed the stakes of the game entirely. The next morning I was checking the inventory in the kitchen when Maria rushed in, her face pale. "Mr. Sterling, you need to see this. The Garrett girl. She's at the dock. She's trying to bribe one of the ferry captains to take her back to the mainland." Alone. I dropped the clipboard and ran toward the window. Down at the water's edge, Brianna was clutching a small bag, her face frantic as she argued with a local boatman. She wasn't just unhappy. She was trying to escape. But as I watched, a dark car pulled up to the end of the pier, a car that didn't belong to the resort. Two men in sharp, black suits stepped out. They didn't look like tourists. They looked like the kind of men who handled collections. One of them approached Brianna, and even from this distance I could see her go rigid with terror. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough to block her path to the boat. "Jax," I roared, grabbing my radio. "Who is on that pier? Who authorized a private vehicle on the dock?" "I don't know, Elias." Jax's voice crackled back, filled with genuine panic. "That's not my brother's crew. Those guys look like feds. Or worse." I watched as the man in the suit leaned in and whispered something into Brianna's ear. She turned even paler, if that was possible, and slowly dropped her bag. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just turned around and began walking back toward the resort, her head bowed like a prisoner. I didn't know it yet, but Silas hadn't just stolen from me. He had stolen from someone much, much more dangerous. And now, my daughter was the collateral. I stood in the shadows of the lobby as she walked past, her eyes hollow and dead. She didn't see me, but I saw the man in the suit watching her from the entrance. He caught my eye for a split second, and he did something that chilled me to the bone. He tipped his hat and smiled. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly who I was. "The game just got a lot more expensive, Elias," I whispered to myself. And for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't sure if I was the one in control. I stayed in the flickering blue dark of the security room for hours after Brianna was turned back from the dock. My breath hitched in my chest every time I saw the man in the black suit on the monitor. He didn't pace. He didn't smoke. He simply leaned against a palm tree with the stillness of a gargoyle, his eyes never leaving the entrance to the South Villa. I knew that look. I'd seen it 30 years ago in the shipping yards of Jersey. It was the look of a man who wasn't there to talk, but to ensure a contract was fulfilled. "Jax," I said into the radio, my voice like gravel. "Find out who those men are. Use your brother's name if you have to, but I want a name for the firm they represent. Now." While Jax scrambled, I watched the screen. Silas had emerged from the villa, his face a mask of sweating, twitching anxiety. He walked toward the man in the suit. I saw Silas gesturing wildly, his mouth moving in a frantic blur of excuses. The man in the suit didn't move. He didn't even take his hands out of his pockets. He just spoke one short sentence, and Silas's knees visibly buckled. Silas turned and stumbled back inside, looking like a man who had just seen his own grave being dug. 10 minutes later, Jax burst into the security room, his face slick with sweat. "Elias, we're in way over our heads. Those guys? They aren't from my brother. They're from the Kensington Syndicate." The name sent a chill down my spine. The Kensingtons weren't just debt collectors. They were old money, with a predatory streak that made Silas's family look like street magicians. They specialized in high-end land grabs, buying up historical properties, raising them, and building glass and steel monstrosities for the ultra-wealthy. "What do they want with Silas?" I asked, though a sickening dread was already blooming in my gut. "They don't want Silas," Jax whispered, leaning over the desk. "They want the property in Orlando. Your property. Silas didn't just take a loan from my brother, Elias. He used that loan as a down payment to option your land to the Kensingtons. He told them you were incapacitated and that he had power of attorney. He sold them the right to buy your house for pennies on the dollar the moment you pass away or are moved to a facility." I leaned back, the air leaving my lungs in a slow, painful hiss. Silas hadn't just stolen my home. He had sold my life. He had bet on my death or my disappearance. I didn't know it yet, but the betrayal went even deeper than that. "And Brianna?" I asked. "The Kensingtons don't like loose ends," Jax said. "If Silas can't deliver the signed voluntary transfer documents by the end of this week, they're going to take it out of his skin. And since Brianna is the one with the legal bloodline, they're keeping her here to make sure Silas doesn't run." I looked back at the monitor. Brianna was sitting on the edge of the fountain in the garden villa, her head in her hands. She looked so small, so broken. This was the daughter I had protected, the girl whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid twice over when she decided to change majors. She was a prisoner in a paradise I owned, guarded by men who wanted to destroy the very ground she grew up on. "Escalate the plan," I said, my voice cold and sharp as a razor. "If the Kensingtons want a show, we'll give them one. But first, I want Silas to feel the walls closing in." That afternoon, the operational challenges at the Azure Reef moved from annoying to psychological. I had Maria remove all the furniture from the garden villa except for 2 stiff, wooden chairs and the beds. We told them the wicker had pest infestations and needed to be burned. We shut off the water to the south villa entirely, claiming a main line had burst. I watched the Vanes Harrison and Eleanor staggering across the grounds in the Chine degree heat, carrying buckets of pool water just to flush their toilets. Harrison looked like he was on the verge of a heart attack, his navy blazer discarded, and his silk shirt clinging to his ribs. Eleanor was weeping openly, her refined lifestyle reduced to a struggle for basic hygiene. "This is an outrage," Harrison bellowed in the lobby, slamming his fist on the mahogany desk. "Where's the manager? Where is Blackwood? I want a helicopter. I want to leave this godforsaken sandbar immediately." Jax, playing his part to perfection, stepped out with a look of feigned exhaustion. "Mr. Vane, I'm afraid the island's only helipad is under emergency repair. And as for the ferry, well, the Kensingtons have chartered all private vessels for the next 48 hours. Surely a man of your stature understands how these things work." Harrison froze. The mention of the Kensingtons acted like a physical blow. He looked at Eleanor, then back at Jax. "The Kensingtons are here? They're waiting for your son-in-law to finish his paperwork," Jax said, leaning in with a conspiratorial whisper. "I'd suggest you encourage him to be quick about it. They aren't known for their patience." I watched from the shadows of the hallway as Harrison turned and marched back toward the villa. He didn't look like a man going to help his son-in-law. He looked like a man going to save his own skin. What happened next was a masterclass in manipulation. I waited until nightfall, when the only sounds were the rhythmic thud of the pipe vibrator and the distant, mocking call of the seabirds. I put on a maintenance uniform and a cap pulled low over my eyes. I grabbed a toolbox and walked toward the garden villa. The Kensington man watched me pass, his hand hovering near his jacket, but I gave him a curt, bored nod. To him, I was just another faceless island worker. I didn't go to the front door. I went to the side window of Brianna's room. She was alone, staring at a single candle she'd lit after the electricity mysteriously failed in her wing. I tapped gently on the glass. She jumped, her eyes wide with terror. She scrambled back, clutching a pillow to her chest. "Who's there? Silas, if that's you?" "It's not Silas," I whispered, keeping my face in the shadows. She froze. She leaned forward, her breath fogging the glass. "That voice! Dad?" "Don't look at me, Brianna. Just listen," I said, my heart breaking at the hope in her voice. "I know everything. I know about the Lown. I know about the Kensingtons. And I know what Silas did to the house. Dad, where are you?" "How did you?" "I'm the one who bought this place, Brianna," I said. "The Azure Reef is mine. I came here to punish Silas, but I didn't realize how deep the rot went." There was a long, agonizing silence. I could hear her muffled sobs through the glass. "He's a monster, Dad. He told me we were in trouble, but I didn't know he sold your home. I tried to leave, but those men, they said if I left, Silas wouldn't be the only one who didn't make it off the island." "I know," I said, "and I'm going to get you out, but I need you to do something for me. I need you to play the part for one more night. Tomorrow, Harrison is hosting a reconciliation dinner in the private dining room. He thinks he's going to broker a deal between Silas and the Kensingtons to save his own reputation. I can't go in there, Dad. I can't look at them." "You have to," I said, "because tomorrow night, at that dinner, the owner of the Azure Reef is going to make an appearance. I'm going to give Silas a choice in front of everyone, and I need you to be ready to walk away when I give the signal." "Dad, be careful," she whispered, her hand pressing against the glass. Silas is desperate. He's been talking about accidents. He thinks if something happens to you while we're here, the house passes to me automatically, and the Kensington deal is finalized. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just waiting for me to pass away. He was considering accelerating the process. The vacation wasn't just a break from me, it was a trap. They had probably planned to call it a tragic drowning, or a fall on the cliffs. Let him try, I said. I'll see you tomorrow, Brianna. Sleep with your door locked. I vanished into the shadows before she could say another word. The next morning, the air was thick with a pre-storm tension. The sky was a bruised charcoal color, and the wind was picking up, whipping the palm fronds into a frenzy. It was the perfect atmosphere for a collapse. I spent the day preparing the private dining room. This wasn't going to be a simple meal. I had Maria set the table with the cheapest, most chipped plates we had in storage. I had the chef prepare a meal that was intentionally offensive, oily, over-salted fish and lukewarm water. But the real centerpiece was the seating. I placed Silas at the foot of the table, and next to him, an empty chair reserved for the owner. At by Kong p.m., the party arrived. Harrison and Eleanor were dressed in their best clothes, though they looked haggard and smelled faintly of the pool water they'd been using to bathe. Silas looked like a ghost, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands trembling so violently he had to keep them in his pockets. Brianna followed, her face a mask of porcelain calm that I knew hid a storm of terror. And at the head of the table sat the man in the black suit from the dock. His name, I'd learned, was Vane Kensington Harrison's own distant cousin and the shark at the head of the syndicate. "Let's get this over with," Vane Kensington said, his voice smooth and cold as a marble floor. "Silas, you have the transfer documents? The ones with your father-in-law's voluntary signature?" Silas pulled a folder from his jacket. His voice was a thin, pathetic reed. I have them, but there's a problem. The witness signature. The notary on the island is refusing to sign off without seeing the old man in person." Harrison leaned forward, his face twitching. "Just sign it, Silas. We'll handle the notary. Elias is thousands of miles away. He'll never know until it's too late. We have to move on this project before the fiscal quarter ends." Eleanor nodded, her eyes cold. "It's for the best, really. He's lived in that house long enough. It's time for something modern." I stood behind the service door, my hand on the handle. I looked at Brianna. She was staring at her father-in-law with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She saw the truth now. These weren't family. They were a pack of wolves in designer wool. "And what about the old man?" Vane Kensington asked, swirling a glass of cheap, warm wine. "What happens when he realizes his house has been bulldozed?" Silas swallowed hard. "He won't. I've already contacted a facility in the interior. Once we get back, we're taking him for a medical evaluation. He won't be coming out." That was it. The final piece of the puzzle. They weren't just stealing my property, they were stealing my freedom. I pushed the door open. The sound of the heavy wood hitting the wall was like a gunshot. Everyone at the table froze. Silas turned, his face already twisting into an excuse for the waiter until he saw my face. I wasn't wearing the maintenance uniform anymore. I was wearing my best suit, the one Margaret had bought me for our 30th anniversary. I walked to the head of the table, my footsteps echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice resonating with a power I hadn't used in 20 years. "I hope you're enjoying the garden accommodations. I've heard the frogs can be quite loud this time of year." Silas's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he was having a stroke. Harrison's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. "Dad?" Brianna whispered, standing up. "Sit down, Brianna," I said gently. I turned my gaze to Silas, then to Harrison, and finally to Vane Kensington. "I believe you were discussing my house, and my voluntary signature." I picked up the folder Silas had placed on the table and flipped it open. I pulled out the document and held it up to the light. "It's a good forgery, Silas. Truly, you almost got the slant of the S right. But there's one thing you forgot." I leaned over the table, my face inches from his. "I own this resort. I own the boat you arrived on. And as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, after a very interesting phone call with my lawyers in Orlando, I own the debt you owe the Kensington Syndicate." Vane Kensington's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I bought the option back from your firm, Vane," I said, sliding a second folder across the table. "I paid double what Silas promised you. The syndicate gets their profit, and I get the legal right to prosecute the man who tried to defraud you." I looked at Silas, who was now hyperventilating. "You thought you were taking a vacation from me, Silas. But the truth is, I've been watching you every second of every day. And now, The vacation is over. I turned to the door and nodded. Two local police officers stepped into the room, followed by Jax Blackwood. "Silas Garrett," I said. "You're under arrest for forgery, grand theft, and conspiracy." But as the officers moved toward him, Silas did something I didn't expect. He didn't surrender. He grabbed a steak knife from the table and lunged not at me, but at Brianna. "If I'm going down, I'm taking her with me," he screamed. What happened next changed the course of my life forever. The silver of the steak knife caught the flickering candlelight, a jagged streak of lightning in the dim room. Time didn't slow down. That's a lie people tell to make trauma sound poetic. In reality, time accelerated, blurring the edges of the world until only the threat remained. Silas's face was a distorted mask of sweat and desperation, his eyes wide and vacant of anything resembling humanity. He wasn't the charming son-in-law anymore. He was a cornered animal, and he was lunging for the only leverage he had left. Brianna didn't scream. She didn't have time. She just gasped, her body flinching back against the stiff wooden chair as Silas's arm came down. But Silas had forgotten one crucial detail. He was a creature of air conditioning and soft hands. He had never had to fight for anything in his life. The two local officers I'd hired weren't just for show. They were former Marine Patrol, men who lived in the humidity and the grit. Before the blade could even graze Brianna's silk dress, the taller officer, a mountain of a man named Callum, moved with a speed that defied his size. He caught Silas's wrist mid-air with a sound like a dry branch snapping. Silas let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp as the knife clattered to the floor, spinning harmlessly toward the corner. Callum didn't stop there. He twisted Silas's arm behind his back and slammed him face first onto the table, right next to the plate of oversalted fish. The clink of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had heard in 20 years. "Get him out of here," I said, my voice low and vibrating with a fury I struggled to contain. My heart was thundering against my ribs, a reminder that I was no longer the young man who could handle a shipping yard brawl. I was an old man who had almost lost his daughter to a parasite I'd invited into the family. "Dad," Brianna whispered, her voice trembling. She was shaking so violently the table was rattling. I moved to her side, shielding her from the sight of Silas being hauled toward the door. "I've got you, Bri. You're safe," I murmured, my hand resting on her shoulder. She leaned into me, a ghost of the little girl who used to hide behind my legs when the world got too loud. "Wait!" Harrison Vane suddenly shouted, standing up so quickly his chair flipped over. He looked at the officers, his face a pale, sickly shade of yellow. "You can't take him. This is a family matter. We can settle this. Elias, name your price. Whatever you paid Kensington, I'll double it. Just don't let this go to the papers. My firm's reputation." I turned to look at Harrison. I let the silence stretch, watching him wither under my gaze. Beside him, Eleanor was frantically trying to wipe a smudge of salt from her silk blouse, her eyes darting around as if looking for an exit that didn't involve walking past the police. "Your reputation, Harrison?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Your son-in-law just tried to stab my daughter in front of you. He forged my name to sell my home while I was still breathing in it. And your first thought is the morning headlines? He was under pressure." Eleanor chirped, her voice brittle. "Silas has always been high-strung. It's the Garrett blood. Truly, Elias, if you had just been more transparent about your finances, none of this would have happened. You practically baited him into this with your modest lifestyle." I actually laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that silenced the room. "I baited him? I worked for 40 years to ensure my daughter had a future. I lived simply so she wouldn't grow up with the hollow, rotting values you people call old money. And you think I'm responsible for his criminality?" I walked toward the Vanes, and for the first time, Harrison actually flinched. "Here is what's going to happen," I said. "Silas is going to the local precinct tonight. Tomorrow morning, he'll be extradited back to Florida to face federal forgery and racketeering charges. And as for the two of you," I leaned over the table, my shadow stretching across them as the storm outside finally broke. Rain began to hammer against the roof, a deafening roar that made the room feel like a sinking ship. "You have 10 minutes to clear your things out of the garden villas," I said. "Your vacation at the Azure Reef is over. I've revoked your guest status. There are no ferries running tonight because of the weather. You can wait on the dock for the morning mail boat. It doesn't have a cabin, so I'd suggest you find some plastic to wrap yourselves in." "You're throwing us out in a tropical storm?" Harrison gasped. That's attempted murder." "No," I replied. "It's a break from me. Isn't that what you wanted? Now, Get out. Before I decide to ask the officers if they have any questions about your involvement in the Kensington deal. That did it. Harrison grabbed Eleanor's arm, and the two of them scurried out of the dining room like rats fleeing a flooding cellar. They didn't even look at Brianna. They didn't ask if she was okay. They just ran to save what was left of their dignity. When the room was finally empty save for me, Brianna, and Jax Blackwood, the silence felt heavy. Jax stood in the corner, looking uncharacteristically somber. I'll go check on the perimeter, Elias, Jax said, nodding toward Brianna. The Kensingtons are gone. They don't stay where there's no profit left. You're clear. Thanks, Jax, I said. I sat down next to Brianna. She was staring at the steak knife on the floor. Her breathing was starting to even out, but her eyes were still hollow. I didn't know, Dad, she said, her voice a fragile thread. I knew we were in debt. I knew Silas was difficult, but I didn't think he was capable of this. I thought I was being a good wife by standing by him. I thought you were the one being stubborn. He's a manipulator, Bree. He spent years gaslighting you, making you feel like your father was an anchor instead of a sail. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold. I'm sorry I kept the truth from you for so long. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. But in doing that, I left you vulnerable to a wolf like Silas. What happens now? She asked, looking up at me. The house. Is it really gone? No, I said firmly. The trust documents I signed in Orlando protected the title. Silas's forgery was a cloud on the title, but it was never legal. And since I now own the debt he tried to use to leverage the house, the syndicate has no claim. Your home is safe. But Silas, he's gone, Bree, for a long time. She leaned her head on my shoulder and wept. We sat there for an hour as the storm raged outside, the ghost of hospitality and his only daughter, finally seeing each other for the first time in years. I didn't know it yet, but the escalation wasn't over. While the veins were shivering on the dock and Silas was sitting in a humid cell, a different kind of betrayal was being uncovered in the resort's back office. Around high. Kong AM, my satellite phone buzzed. It was Marcus. Elias, you need to look at the offshore wire transfers Silas was making. I finally cracked the encrypted subledger he was using on your home Wi-Fi before they left for the islands. What is it, Marcus? Just more debt payments? No. Marcus's voice sounded grim. He wasn't just paying back Blackwood Capital. He was sending large, recurring sums to an account in the Cayman Islands. An account registered to a holding company called EB Management. My heart stopped. EB. Eleanor and Brianna. No. Who's the signatory on the account, Marcus? That's the thing, Elias. It's not Silas, and it's not the veins. The signatory is Brianna Sterling Garrett. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, the screen glowing in the dark. I looked toward the guest room where I'd tucked Brianna in just an hour ago. She had looked so broken, so innocent. But if Marcus was right, if she was the one receiving the money Silas had stolen from me, then this entire week hadn't just been Silas's plan. Was my daughter the victim I thought she was, or was she the architect of my destruction? I stood up, my joints aching, and walked toward the guest wing. The mysterious rattle in the pipes was still going, a rhythmic, haunting sound that seemed to pulse with the secret I'd just discovered. I reached her door and hesitated. The door was slightly ajar. I peeked inside. The bed was empty. The covers were thrown back, and the window was wide open, the rain misting into the room. I ran to the window and looked out into the storm. Through the sheets of rain and the swaying palms, I saw a flashlight flickering down by the private cove, the one place on the island where the current was strong enough to pull a body out to sea if they weren't careful. But she wasn't alone. I saw two figures. One was Brianna. The other was Jax Blackwood. They were standing near the edge of the cliff, huddled together. Brianna wasn't weeping. She was handing Jax a small, waterproof satchel. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, not the kiss of a manager to a guest, but the kiss of a partner. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my own blood. I realized then that Silas hadn't been the only one playing me. Jax hadn't just been my puppet. He had been the plan B. Silas was the fall guy, the loud, arrogant distraction, while Brianna and Jax secured the real prize. They didn't just want the house. They wanted the entire Sterling Wayfarer portfolio. And they had used Silas's arrest to clear the board so they could move in on the grieving father. I backed away from the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold clarity I'd felt all week was replaced by a searing, white-hot vacuum. I was alone on an island with 20 staff members who had been paid by Jax, a daughter who was a stranger, and a storm that was cutting us off from the world. I didn't know if I could survive the night. But I knew one thing. The ghost of hospitality was done being a host. I reached into my toolbox and pulled out the master key to the resort's communications array. If they wanted to play a game of shadows, I was going to turn out the lights for good. As I headed toward the basement, I heard footsteps in the hall behind me. "Dad?" It was Brianna's voice. Sweet, melodic, and perfectly pitched to break my heart. "Are you still awake? I had a nightmare. I need to talk to you about the inheritance papers." I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. "I'm sure you do, Brianna," I whispered to the dark. "I'm sure you do." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at her right then, I was afraid she would see the shattered remains of my heart in my eyes, and I wasn't ready to let her see me weak. Not yet. I kept my gaze fixed on the end of the corridor, where the heavy steel door to the basement mechanical room waited. It was the only place on this island that felt honest, a room full of gears, grease, and simple physics. "Dad?" She called out again, her voice closer now. "Why are you going down there? The storm is getting worse. You should be resting." "I'm checking the backup generator, Brianna," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a different man, someone colder, someone who had already mourned the daughter standing behind him. "The surges are hitting the main array. I don't want the resort to go dark." "Let the staff handle it," she said, her footsteps stopping just a few feet away. I could smell the faint scent of rain and salt on her, the evidence of her midnight meeting with Jax. "Come back to the suite. We need to talk about what happens when we get back to Florida. Silas is. He's out of the picture now. We need to secure the estate. We need to make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of. The phrase sounded like a velvet-lined coffin. "I'll be up in a minute," I said. "Go back to bed." I didn't wait for her to respond. I stepped through the mechanical door and locked it from the inside. The heavy thud of the bolt was the only thing that kept my knees from buckling. I slumped against the cold metal, gasping for air. Every instinct I had as a father screamed that I was wrong, that there was an explanation, that the Cayman account was a plant, that the kiss on the cliff was a trick of the light. But the numbers didn't lie. Marcus Thorne didn't lie. And the look on Brianna's face when Silas was hauled away wasn't just relief. It was the look of a gambler who had just watched their biggest rival go bust. I moved to the back of the room, behind the massive desalination tanks, where I had hidden a secondary server terminal. It was a rugged, industrial unit tied directly into the resort's private fiber line. I pulled up the EB management file Marcus had sent. The hardest thing about being betrayed by your own blood isn't the loss of money or property. It's the realization that every memory you cherish was just a data point in someone else's long game. I began to dig into the subfolders. The digital trail was sickeningly thorough. It wasn't just about the house in Orlando. Brianna and Jax had been communicating for over a year. They hadn't met here. They had met in Miami during one of Brianna's business trips. Jax wasn't just a manager. He was a specialist in wealth extraction. The plan was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Silas was meant to be the aggressive threat, the one who would forge the documents and threaten the sale, driving me into a state of panic and isolation. Then, Brianna would step in as the savior. She would discover Silas's betrayal, help me arrest him, and in my state of emotional devastation and gratitude, I would sign over the Sterling Wayfarer portfolio to EB Management for safekeeping. I was meant to be the ghost of hospitality in a literal sense, tucked away in a high-end assisted living facility, comfortably funded, while Brianna and Jax raised my life's work and built their own empire on the ruins. I looked at a drafted document in the folder. It was a medical power of attorney, already filled out with my name, citing early onset cognitive decline and financial mismanagement. All it needed was a signature from a doctor. I checked the consultant field. It was a name I recognized from Brianna's marketing firm, a man who owed his board seat to her. They were going to lobotomize my life. I sat there in the hum of the machinery, the storm howling through the vents above, and I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. I wasn't Elias Sterling, the grieving father, anymore. I was Elias Sterling, the man who had built a shipping empire from a single rusty tugboat. I was the man who knew every shortcut in the Caribbean and every loophole in maritime law. They wanted to extract my wealth? Fine. I would show them what happens when the ghost decides to haunt the house. I pulled up the resort's main operational interface. I didn't shut down the power. I did something much more surgical. I went into the guest registration system and the payroll database. I changed the access codes for every smart lock on the property, isolating the manager's office and the guest wings. Then, I sent a single, encrypted message to the local police chief, a man who had already been paid handsomely for Silas's arrest. "Chief, There is a second suspect in the conspiracy. She's currently in South Villa Bourne. I need a quiet containment until the morning ferry. Do not process until I arrive at the station. I was about to hit send when the monitor flickered. The camera feed from the hallway outside the mechanical room popped up on a secondary screen. Brianna was still there, but she wasn't alone. Jax Blackwood was standing next to her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He wasn't wearing his manager's blazer anymore. He was in dark, tactical gear, and he was holding a master key card, the one I had supposedly deactivated. "He's in there," Brianna said, her voice devoid of the warmth she'd used just minutes ago. "He's been in there too long. He's smarter than we gave him credit for, Jax. He's probably on the server right now." "It doesn't matter," Jax said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "The storm is the perfect cover. If the generator fails and he gets caught in the fire suppression discharge, nobody's going to ask questions. It'll look like an old man trying to be a hero and failing. We have the signed intent documents from Silas. With the old man gone, you're the sole heir. The Kensingtons will still buy the land from us once the probate clears." "I wanted more time," Brianna whispered. "I wanted him to sign the management transfer voluntarily. It would have been cleaner." "Clean is for people with no ambition, Bri," Jax said. "Now, stand back." He swiped the card. The light on the door blinked red. He swiped it again. Red. He growled and kicked the door. He changed the codes. The old fox actually did it. I watched them on the screen, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. I was locked in a room with only one exit, and a man who was ready to kill me was on the other side of it. I looked around the mechanical room. It was full of heavy tools, but I was 64 years old. I couldn't outfight Jax Blackwood, but I could outthink him. I reached for the main gas line valve for the resort's kitchen and laundry boilers. These were massive industrial-grade units. I didn't shut them off. I bypassed the safety sensors and increased the pressure. Then, I went to the fire suppression override. "Jax," I yelled through the door, my voice echoing in the chamber. "I'm looking at the EB management files. I've already forwarded the entire directory to the FBI field office in Miami. The moment the Wi-Fi pings a satellite, you're both done." I heard a muffled curse from the other side. "Open the door, Elias. We can talk about this. You don't want to do something you'll regret." "I've spent 10 years regretting my silence, Jax," I shouted back. "I've spent 10 years funding a daughter who was waiting for me to die. There's nothing left to talk about." I heard Jax's shoulder hit the door. The steel groaned, but the bolt held. He hit it again. He was a desperate man now, and desperate men are predictable. He wasn't going to wait for the accident anymore. He was going to break in and end it. I grabbed my bag and headed for the secondary emergency exit, a narrow, vertical crawl space that led to the roof. It was meant for maintenance, but I'd kept myself lean over the years. As I started to climb the rusted ladder, I heard the sound of the main door splintering. "Elias," Jax roared. I didn't look back. I hauled myself up the ladder, the air growing colder, and the sound of the rain getting louder. I reached the roof hatch and pushed it open. The storm hit me like a physical blow, blinding rain and wind that threatened to toss me off the 3-story building. I scrambled onto the wet gravel of the roof, my lungs burning. I looked down over the edge. In the darkness below, I could see the lights of the South Villa. I could see the vanes, still huddled on the dock under a piece of blue plastic, looking like shivering ghosts. And I could see the security lights of the resort, flickering as the pressure in the boiler lines began to redline. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had 1 bar of signal, the emergency satellite link. I didn't call the police. I called Silas. He was in the local jail, but I knew the sergeant on duty. For $1,000, he would hand Silas the phone for 60 seconds. "Silas," I said when the line clicked open. "Elias, you old bastard, you think you won? I'm going to have my father's lawyers." "Shut up and listen, Silas," I said, shielding the phone from the wind. "Brianna and Jax Blackwood are in the mechanical room right now. They've been skimming from you for years. The EB management account. It's Brianna's. She didn't get caught in your mess, Silas. She built the mess to get rid of you. She was going to let you rot in a Florida prison while she and Jax lived on my estate." Silence. Then a ragged, broken sound. "You're lying. Check the ledger in your private cloud, Silas. The password is Margaret Motgin Chintrum Tarmui Chin. She told you it was for legal fees, but look at the wire transfers to Jax's brother. She's been paying him to keep the Kensingtons on your neck." "I'll kill her," Silas whispered. "I'll kill them both." "You don't have to," I said. "Just give the sergeant the name of the clean notary you used in Miami, the one Brianna hired for you. Give me the name, and I'll make sure you don't face the conspiracy to commit murder charge that Jax is currently trying to pin on you. Murder? He's in the basement right now, trying to kill me, Silas. And he's going to say it was your idea. A long pause. The sound of the storm was a roar in my ears. Finally, Silas spoke. The notary's name is Miller, Thomas Miller. He works out of a strip mall in Hialeah. He has the original drafts, the ones Brianna signed first. Thank you, Silas. I hung up. I had it. The proof that Brianna wasn't just a passive recipient, but an active forger. I looked toward the roof hatch. It burst open, and Jax Blackwood hauled himself out, his face wet with rain and twisted with a predatory grin. Brianna followed a second later, her hair matted to her face, her eyes wild. Nowhere left to run, Dad. Brianna shouted over the wind. Just give us the master override. Give it to us, and we'll let you take a boat to the mainland. You can live out your days in peace. We just want what's ours. Ours? One, I yelled back, standing on the edge of the roof, the ocean churning 50 feet below. Nothing here is yours. Not the name, not the money, and certainly not the soul of this family. Jax started toward me, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was 10 feet away. 5. I didn't know it yet, I thought as he lunged. But I wasn't the one who was going to fall. Just as Jax's hand reached for my collar, the resort's main boiler directly beneath us in the mechanical room let out a deafening metallic shriek. The ground beneath our feet shuddered. The pressure I'd built up had finally found a weak point in the old pipes. A jet of superheated steam erupted from the vent right next to Jax. He screamed, stumbling back, his hands over his face. Brianna shrieked and ran toward him. Jax! In the chaos, the roof hatch slammed shut, and the security lights of the entire resort finally died, plunging us into absolute, terrifying darkness. What happened next changed everything I believed about survival. I felt a hand grab my arm in the dark. It wasn't Jax. It was someone smaller, someone stronger. Dad! This way! I was pulled toward the edge of the roof, toward the emergency fire escape I hadn't seen in the rain. But as the lightning flashed, illuminating the roof for a split second, I saw who was holding me. It wasn't Brianna. It was Maria, the head housekeeper. And behind her, 5 of the groundskeepers were standing with flashlights and heavy iron bars. We don't work for Mr. Blackwood anymore, Maria said, her voice steady as a rock. We work for the man who paid our families. She looked at Brianna and Jax, who were cowering near the steam vent. Mr. Sterling, Maria said, what do you want us to do with them? I looked at my daughter. She was shivering, her expensive dress ruined, her plan evaporating in the Caribbean rain. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw the little girl again. But then, she looked at Jax, and she reached for his hand. The choice was made. Leave them, I said. The police will be here when the storm breaks. Until then, let them enjoy the hospitality of the Azure Ray. I turned my back on them and followed Maria down the ladder. I hit the ground and didn't look up. I walked toward the main office, my body aching, my mind already calculating the next move. I had rock bottom. I had lost my daughter. But I had my name, I had my truth, and I had a resort full of people who finally knew who the real master was. Revenge was a cold dish, but tonight I was going to serve it with a side of absolute, unyielding justice. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the exhumus in a state of dripping, bruised silence. The sky was the color of a faded violet, the kind of light that doesn't so much illuminate the world as it does expose its wreckage. I sat in my office, the high-back leather chair feeling like a throne made of salt. My bones ached with a deep, rhythmic throb that no amount of aspirin could touch. I was 64 years old, and in the last 12 hours, I had survived a tropical tempest, a boiler explosion, and the realization that my only child had wished for my heart to stop beating. I watched the steam rise from a cup of black coffee that Maria had brought me. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed my hand before retreating back to the kitchen to feed the staff. They were the only family I had left now, a group of people I had known for less than a week, bound to me by the simple fact that I treated them like human beings, while the people of my own blood treated them like shadows. What happened next was the hardest part of the entire ordeal, I thought, staring at the closed door of the South Villa on my security monitor. The silence after the storm is where the real ghosts come out to play. Around by Hongam, the local authorities arrived. 3 skiffs cut through the glassy, post-storm water, their engines a low hum that signaled the end of the vacation. I stood on the porch of the main office as the officers stepped onto the dock. They moved past the Vanes Harrison and Eleanor, who were now nothing more than 2 sodden, shivering heaps of discarded luxury. Harrison's navy blazer was stained with sea salt and engine oil, and Eleanor's expensive silk blouse was torn at the shoulder. They looked up at the officers with a desperate, pathetic hope, but the officers didn't stop. They had their orders. "Mr. Sterling," the chief said, tipping his cap as he reached the porch. "We have the suspect from the precinct, Silas Garrett. He's in the lead boat, and we're here for the others." "They're in the South Villa, Chief," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears, locked from the outside. "I'll walk you down." I led the way. My legs felt heavy, as if I were wading through deep water. Every step toward that villa was a step away from the life I had known for 30 years. I wasn't just walking toward a crime scene. I was walking toward the final burial of my daughter's innocence. The officers broke the seal on the door. The room smelled of stagnant heat and stale sweat. Jax Blackwood was sitting on the floor in the corner, his face a mess of red, blistered skin from the steam vent. He didn't look like a predator anymore. He looked like a burnt-out fuse. Brianna was standing by the window, her back to the door. She was wearing a white dress that was now gray with grime and rain. "Brianna Sterling Garrett," the chief said, stepping into the room. "You are under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and endangerment. Please come with us." She didn't move. She didn't cry. She just kept staring at the ocean. "Is he dead?" she asked, her voice a flat, dead monotone. "Your father is right here, Brianna," I said. She turned then. Her eyes were red-rimmed and sunken, but there was no remorse in them. There was only a cold, crystalline resentment that chilled me to my very marrow. "You always had to be the hero, didn't you, Dad? Always the martyr. Living in that dumpy house, wearing those pathetic clothes, making us feel like we were beggars while you were sitting on millions. You lied to me my whole life." "I didn't lie to you, Brianna," I said, stepping closer, though every part of me wanted to run. "I gave you everything you ever asked for. I just didn't give you the one thing you didn't earn. The power to destroy what your mother and I built." "You built it for me," she screamed, the mask finally slipping. Her face twisted into something unrecognizable, a mirror image of the greed I had seen in Silas. "It was mine. It was always supposed to be mine. Why did you make me wait? Why did you make me grovel for every cent while you watched from your high horse?" "I didn't make you grovel," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I made you a marketing director. I made you a homeowner. I made you a wife. You chose the rest. You chose Jax. You chose the Kensingtons. You chose to forge my name on a document that effectively ended my life." The officers moved in then, taking her by the arms. She didn't fight them. She just looked at me with a smirk that told me I hadn't won anything. I didn't know it yet, but the reversal was only halfway complete, I thought as they led her out. The real blow wasn't her arrest. It was the box she left on the nightstand. I walked over to the small mahogany table where she'd been standing. There was a small, velvet-lined box. I opened it. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a collection of letters I had written to Margaret during her last months in the hospital. Letters full of my fears, my secrets, and the locations of my offshore accounts. Brianna hadn't just been planning for a year. She had been raiding my private life for a decade. She had known about the Sterling Wayfarer portfolio since she was 22. Every emergency she'd had, every bill I'd paid, had been a calculated test to see how much I was willing to bleed for her. She had been draining me slow, waiting for the moment when the ghost was weak enough to be exorcised. I sat on the bed, the weight of the letters feeling like lead in my lap. I had reached rock bottom. My daughter hadn't just tried to kill me. She had never actually loved me. I was just a bank account with a heartbeat to her. I looked at my reflection in the dusty mirror over the dresser. I looked old. I looked tired. I looked like a man who had spent his entire life building a fortress only to realize the enemy had been inside the walls the whole time. I stayed there for a long time. The sounds of the resort resuming around me, the staff began cleaning. The generator hummed back to life. The world was moving on, but I was frozen in the wreckage of my own heart. But then, I heard a knock on the doorframe. It was Harrison Vane. He was standing there, looking slightly more composed now that he'd had a chance to dry off, though his eyes were still darting around like a cornered rat. "Elias," he said, his voice regaining some of that old money arrogance. "I think we need to talk, man to man, about the fallout of all this." I didn't look up from the letters. "There is no fallout, Harrison. There's only justice. Your son-in-law is in a boat, and my daughter is right behind him." "Yes, well, that's unfortunate for the children," Harrison said, stepping into the room as if he still had an invitation. "But let's be practical. If this goes to trial, your name gets dragged through the mud just as much as ours. The Kensingtons. They're already pulling their support from the Orlando project. If you were to, say, Drop the charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I'm sure my firm could find a way to reimburse you for your troubles here. I finally looked up. I looked at Harrison Vane, this man who thought everything in life was a negotiation, that even the attempted murder of a man's soul could be settled with a check and a handshake. What happened next was the moment the ghost finally decided to stop haunting and start hunting, I thought. I stood up, the letters still in my hand. I walked toward Harrison, and for the first time in my life, I felt no need to be polite. I felt no need to be the modest man he thought I was. "Harrison," I said, my voice low and vibrating with a power that made him stop mid-sentence. "You think I care about my name? I've spent 20 years being a ghost so that my daughter could have a life. That life is over. My name is the only thing I have left, and I'm going to use it to burn your world to the ground. Now see here." "No, you see here," I interrupted. "I own the debt Silas owes the Kensingtons, which means I own the collateral he put up. And do you know what he used as a secondary guarantee, Harrison? When the Orlando house wasn't enough?" Harrison's face went from yellow to a ghostly, translucent white. He wouldn't." "He did," I said, pulling a digital tablet from my pocket and showing him the secondary ledger Silas had kept. "He used the Vane family estate in Greenwich. He forged your signature, Harrison, just like he forged mine. He bet your house against my life, and he lost both." Harrison slumped against the wall, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "My house, that's been in the family for 4 generations. Not anymore," I said. "As of midnight, the Greenwich property belongs to Sterling Wayfarer Holdings. I'm going to raise it, Harrison. I'm going to turn that 4-generation legacy into a low-income housing development. And I'm going to name the community center after my wife, Margaret, the woman your wife called mediocre over dinner." Harrison began to sob a dry, hacking sound that had no dignity in it. He looked at me, pleading with his eyes, but I felt nothing. The man who had empathy for people like the Vanes had died on that roof last night. "Get out," I said. "The mail boat is leaving in 20 minutes. If you're not on it, I'll have the chief arrest you for trespassing on my private property." He turned and stumbled out of the room, his world effectively erased. I walked back to my office, the letters tucked under my arm. The reversal was complete. I had taken their money, their homes, and their prestige. I had dismantled the Garretts and the Vanes with the same cold efficiency I used to move shipping containers across the Atlantic. But as I sat down at my desk, I realized the most important truth of all. I didn't know it yet. I whispered to the empty room. But the final twist wasn't about the money or the houses. It was about the one thing I hadn't looked at in the EB management folder. I pulled up the file one last time. There was a hidden directory, one Marcus hadn't mentioned. It was a video file, dated 2 years ago. I hit play. The screen showed a doctor's office. I recognized the wallpaper. It was my own primary care physician in Orlando. But I wasn't the patient. It was Margaret. She was sitting in the chair, looking pale but resolute. And sitting next to her, holding her hand, wasn't me. It was Brianna. "Mom," Brianna's voice said on the recording. "Are you sure you want to do this? If Dad finds out? Your father doesn't need to know the truth about the Sterling Wayfarer money, Bree," Margaret said, her voice weak but clear. "He thinks he's a ghost, but he's really a king. And kings don't handle loss well. If I die and he knows how much we really have, he'll spend the rest of his life trying to buy back the time we lost. I want you to take the secondary accounts. I want you to use them to keep him grounded, to keep him in that house. It's the only place he's ever been truly happy." I watched as my daughter, 10 years younger, and looking genuinely devastated, nodded. "I'll keep him there, Mom. I promise. I'll make sure he never finds out he's the richest man in the state. I'll make him think we need him. It's the only way he'll stay." The video ended. I sat in the dark, the silence of the office pressing in on me like a physical weight. My daughter hadn't started out as a monster. She had started out as a girl trying to fulfill a mother's dying wish. She had spent years trying to keep me grounded, trying to play the part of the needy daughter so I would feel purposeful. But somewhere along the way, the lie had become the truth. The pretend greed had become real. The acting had become an identity. Silas hadn't corrupted her. The weight of the secret had. She had spent so long pretending to want my money to keep me happy that she had eventually decided she actually wanted it to keep herself free. I had created the monster by being the man she was trying to save. What happened next was the final move of the game, I thought, my eyes blurring with tears. And it was the one move I never thought I'd have to make. I picked up the phone and dialed the chief. "Chief," I said, my voice thick. About my daughter, Brianna Sterling Garrett. Yes, Mr. Sterling. We're just about to process her. Stop, I said. I have new evidence. Evidence that changes everything. I looked at the letters from Margaret. I looked at the video of my wife. I had my revenge, I had my houses, I had my wealth, but I was still a ghost, and if I wanted to be a father again, I had to do the one thing a king never does. I had to surrender. I'm coming down to the station, I said, and I'm bringing my lawyer. We're going to discuss a full pardon for my daughter, on one condition. I hung up and looked out at the turquoise water of the Exumas. The sun was fully up now, bright and unforgiving. The reversal was over. The finale was about to begin. The air inside the local police station was thick with the scent of floor wax and stale coffee, a sharp contrast to the salt-kissed morning outside. I walked through the small lobby, my footsteps echoing against the linoleum. I looked like a man of leisure in my linen suit, but inside, I felt like a clock with a broken mainspring. I was still ticking, but the rhythm was all wrong. The chief met me at the heavy iron gate that separated the offices from the holding cells. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. He had seen the video I'd sent him, the one of Margaret and Brianna. He knew that the crime I was reporting wasn't just about money. It was about a family that had cannibalized itself in the dark. She's in the interview room. Mr. Sterling, the chief said quietly. We haven't processed the paperwork for the extradition yet. You have time. Thank you, Chief. I entered the room. It was a small, windowless box with a single metal table. Brianna sat there, her hands cuffed to a rail on the wall. She looked up when I entered, and for a split second, that flash of resentment returned to her eyes. But then she saw the tablet in my hand, and she saw the look on my face, the look of a man who had finally seen the bottom of the ocean. I didn't say a word. I simply sat down, turned the tablet toward her, and hit play. The sounds of Margaret's voice filled the room. Your father doesn't need to know. Kings don't handle loss well. I want you to take the secondary accounts, to keep him grounded. I watched Brianna's face as she listened to her mother's dying breath. I watched the armor of her arrogance begin to crack. The sneer faded, replaced by a trembling lip. By the time Margaret said, I want you to use them to keep him happy, Brianna was shaking so hard the handcuffs rattled against the metal rail. I turned the video off. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I've ever felt. I didn't know it yet, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But the person who failed you wasn't Silas. It wasn't Jax. It was me. And it was your mother. Brianna looked at me, her eyes streaming with tears. She made me promise, Dad. She said if you knew you were worth $50 million, you'd never stop trying to buy a miracle. She wanted you to stay in that house because that's where we were a family. She didn't want you to become a ghost. But I became one anyway, I said. And in trying to keep me grounded, she gave you a secret that was too heavy for a girl to carry. You spent 10 years pretending we were struggling. You spent 10 years watching me pinch pennies while you knew there were millions in the Cayman accounts. That kind of lie. It rots you from the inside out, doesn't it? She nodded, a choked sob escaping her throat. At first, I did it for her. I really did. But then, I started to like the power. I liked knowing something you didn't. And when I met Silas, he was so desperate for status that I realized I could use the secret money to buy the life I thought I deserved. I started thinking of the Sterling Wayfarer portfolio as my inheritance, not our legacy. I started wanting you to go away so I could stop the pretending. I leaned over the table, taking her cuffed hands in mine. They were ice cold. The secret is out now, Brianna. The pretending is over. Are you going to let them take me back to Florida? She asked, her voice small and terrified. I've spent the last hour on the phone with the district attorney in Orlando and the Kensington's legal team, I said. I am dropping all charges against you. I'm telling them the Ebb Management account was a legitimate family trust that I authorized. I'm taking the fall for the forgery, claiming I gave Silas verbal permission and then changed my mind. Brianna's eyes widened. Dad, you'll lose your reputation. You could face charges yourself for filing a false report. I'm a ghost, remember? I said with a faint, sad smile. Ghosts don't have reputations. But there is a price for your freedom, Brianna. She swallowed hard. Anything. The Azure Reef is being sold. Not to the Kensingtons, but to a non-profit foundation I'm establishing in your mother's name. It will be a sanctuary for families dealing with terminal illness, a place where they can have the vacation they actually deserve, without the lies. And as for the house in Orlando, it's already on the market. Where will you go? I'm moving back to the islands, I said, but not as an owner, as a guest, and as for you, you're going to stay in Florida. But you're not going back to your marketing firm. You're not going back to the veins. I've liquidated your personal accounts, the ones tied to the Cayman money. You have exactly $10,000 to your name. No trust fund. No inheritance. No safety net. I stood up, signaling the chief to come in and unlock her. You're giving me my freedom, she whispered, but you're taking away my life. No, I corrected her. I'm giving you the chance to earn one. For the first time in your life, Brianna, you're going to find out who you are when you aren't a Sterling. If you want to see me again, if you want to be my daughter again, you'll find me at the Azure Reef in 1 year. But don't come as a princess. Come as a woman who has built something of her own. The chief unlocked the cuffs. Brianna stood up, rubbing her wrists. She looked at me for a long time, not with greed, not with hate, but with a profound, terrifying realization that she was truly alone for the first time. What about Silas? She asked. Silas isn't a Sterling, I said, my voice turning to iron. And he isn't family. He's being extradited this afternoon. Harrison Vane has already officially disowned him to try and save his own firm. Silas is going to spend the next 15 years in a federal cell, and he's going to have a lot of time to think about the math of his choices. I walked out of the room without looking back. The finale of the Azure Reef vacation was a quiet affair. I stood on the dock as the morning mailboat arrived. It wasn't a luxury yacht. It was a sturdy, salt-stained vessel that smelled of fish and diesel. Harrison and Eleanor Vane were forced to share the deck with 3 crates of live chickens and a stack of rusted plumbing supplies. They didn't look like old money anymore. They looked like 2 people who had spent their entire lives building a house of cards and were now realizing they were standing in a hurricane. As the boat pulled away, I saw Brianna standing at the rail. She didn't wave. She didn't shout. She just watched me until the boat was a tiny speck on the turquoise horizon. I turned back to the resort. Maria and the staff were waiting for me on the porch. The operational challenges were over. The rattling pipes were silent. The air conditioning was humming at a perfect 68 degrees. Mr. Sterling, Maria said, handing me a fresh glass of water. The first family from the foundation arrives tomorrow. A young mother from Jersey and her 2 boys. They've never seen the ocean. Thank you, Maria, I said. Make sure they get the presidential suite, and make sure the kitchen has plenty of ice cream. I walked into my office, the one I would soon be vacating for the new foundation director. I sat at the desk and looked at the photo of Margaret. I had lost my daughter to a lie, but I had found my soul in the truth. I had dismantled the villains. I had protected my legacy. And I had given Brianna the only gift that mattered, a chance to be better than the people who raised her. I picked up a pen and a piece of stationery. I began to write. Dear Brianna, I didn't know it yet when I started this journey, but the most addictive thing in the world isn't money. It isn't power. It's the peace that comes when you stop being a ghost and start being a man. I'll be waiting at the dock next year. I hope you like the view. I sealed the envelope and set it on the desk. The family revenge was over. The story of Elias Sterling, the man who owned paradise but chose to live in the light, was just beginning. I walked out onto the balcony and breathed in the salt air. The sun was high, the water was clear, and for the first time in 20 years, the house was finally quiet. I was no longer the ghost of hospitality. I was just Elias, and that was more than enough.